The cops from Beacon County roll up to the woods with search dogs and flashlights looking for a missing body. Meanwhile, Scott McCall is at home, fixing his lacrosse stick, doing pull-ups, and getting ready for bed. Then, he hears a noise outside. Grabbing a bat, he steps onto the porch only to nearly take a swing at his best friend, Stiles Stilinski, who's hanging from the gutter like a raccoon. Stiles, always up to something, spills the news. His dad, Sheriff Stilinski, and the police are out searching for half of a missing girl's body. Joggers found the first half earlier. Stiles convinces Scott to tag along and investigate. Scott isn't thrilled, he's got lacrosse tryouts the next day, but Stiles brushes it off, saying he'll just be warming the bench anyway. They sneak into the woods, but the hike up the steep hill is brutal for Scott thanks to his asthma. He stops to use his inhaler, but Stiles is way too excited he sprints ahead and ditches him. While trying to catch up, Scott accidentally runs straight into a cop and his search dog and ends up busted. Sheriff Stilinski finds Stiles too, scolds him for listening to police calls, and asks where Scott is. Stiles plays it cool, lying that Scott stayed home. The sheriff doesn't buy it but drags Stiles back to the car anyway. Scott, hiding behind a tree, waits until they leave before making a run for it, but something isn't right. A shadow moves in the trees. He reaches for his inhaler, then suddenly, a stampede of deer charges through, knocking him to the ground. His inhaler flies off. When the chaos dies down, Scott grabs his phone's flashlight and starts looking for it. Instead, he finds something way worse, the missing girl's other half. Panic hits him hard, but before he can move, a deep growl echoes from behind. A massive, wolf-like creature with glowing red eyes emerges from the trees. Scott barely has time to react before it lunges, biting deep into his side. He screams in pain, rolls down a hill, and stumbles onto the road, drenched, bleeding, and shaken. In the distance, a wolf howls. And just like that, Scott McCall's life changes forever. The next morning, Scott rides his bike to school but gets bumped by Jackson Whittemore, a rich and arrogant lacrosse player. He meets up with Stiles and shows him a big bite wound on his side. Scott thinks it was a wolf, but Stiles says there haven't been wolves in California for over 60 years. Scott also says he found the other half of the dead body in the woods, which excites Stiles. But Stiles quickly gets distracted when he sees Lydia Martin, his longtime crush. She ignores him, and he jokingly blames Scott for making him look uncool. In English class, the teacher writes metamorphosis on the board, which oddly fits Scott's situation. A loud ringtone suddenly startles him, and he realizes he can hear a phone ringing outside. He sees a new girl, Allison Argent, sitting on a bench and is shocked that he can hear her whole conversation from far away. A few minutes later, she walks into class and takes the only open seat behind Scott. When she doesn't have a pen, he hands her one. They smile at each other. After school, Scott and Stiles go to their lockers. Scott sees Allison again, and they smile at each other before Lydia walks up and compliments Allison's jacket. Allison says her mom was a fashion buyer, which impresses Lydia. Right away, Lydia calls Allison her new best friend. Jackson joins them, casually showing off that he's Lydia's boyfriend. He and Lydia invite Allison to a party after the lacrosse scrimmage, but she says she has family night. Jackson keeps bragging about the team's championships, and Allison finally agrees to watch practice. At practice, Stiles worries about being stuck on the bench, but Scott is focused. He wants to finally make first line. Allison and Lydia sit in the bleachers watching. Coach Finstock puts Scott in goal, expecting him to fail. The loud whistle hurts Scott's ears so much that he doubles over in pain. A player takes a shot and hits Scott's helmet hard. Scott recovers and suddenly realizes his vision and reflexes are sharper. The next shot comes at him, and time slows down. He easily catches the ball. Then he blocks 3 more shots in a row, shocking everyone. Stiles, coach, and even Lydia are surprised. Allison watches, impressed. Scott knows something about him has changed. Scott's new skills grab everyone's attention, especially Jackson, who tries to embarrass him with a powerful shot. But Scott catches it like it's nothing. Jackson is frustrated, especially when he sees Lydia cheering for Scott. The whole crowd, including Stiles and Allison, goes wild over Scott's amazing performance. Scott's freaking out, heightened senses, freaky reflexes, and a nose sharper than a damn bloodhound. To prove it, he calls out the gum flavor in Stiles' pocket before Stiles even realizes he has any. Scott's convinced it's some medical nightmare, but Stiles just cracks werewolf jokes. Scott's not laughing. They head to the woods to find Scott's inhaler, but some mysterious dude shows up, glares at them, and tosses it back. Stiles recognizes Derek Hale, the guy whose whole family died in a fire years ago. At the animal clinic, Scott checks the wound from his bite, except there isn't one. It healed overnight. The clinic's cats freak out, hissing like he's the devil. Before he can process, Allison shows up, drenched and crying about hitting a dog. Scott calms her down, calms the dog, with glowing eyes, no big deal, and even patches up its broken leg like a pro. Their chemistry is clearly off the charts. Scott offers her a dry shirt, sneaks a glance while she changes, and the dog judges him hard. Awkward. Before leaving, she ditches her family night excuse and agrees to Lydia's party. Scott crashes for the night, then wakes up in the woods barefoot in a coyote den. Next morning, he's back in the forest, wearing nothing but boxers. He spots a shadowy beast, the same one that bit him. Panic mode activated. He bolts, jumps a fence, and lands straight in someone's backyard pool. At school, Jackson corners him in the locker room, grilling him about his sudden athletic glow-up. Steroids? Scott denies it, but Jackson's not buying it and promises to get answers. Lacrosse tryouts roll around, and Scott's a damn machine. Speed, agility, and an insane front flip goal. Coach is hyped, but Styles stays still. Something's seriously off, and they both know it. That night, Styles goes full conspiracy mode, digging into werewolf lore, full moons, rage triggers, and the nightmare Scott's walking into. When Scott shows up, Styles straight up tells him, "Dude, you're turning into a werewolf. Cancel your date with Allison before you maul someone." Scott refuses, so Styles grabs his phone to do it himself. Bad move. Scott nearly decks him but stops last second, instead wrecking a chair and storming out. Once he's gone, Styles stares at the deep claw marks in the wood. Scott picks up Allison, brushing off his mom's questions. The party at the Martin house starts off great, until he spots Derek lurking. A dog growls at Derek, but one look shuts it up. Scott blinks, and Derek's gone, replaced by a shadowy figure leaping onto the roof. Scott tries to shake it off, dancing with Allison, but when his eyes meet Lydia's across the pool, wrapped up with Jackson, unease creeps in. Then the full moon rises. A tidal wave of nausea, sharp noises, and overwhelming scents slam into him. Panicked, he bolts, leaving Allison confused. Before she can follow, Derek steps out of the shadows, introducing himself as Scott's friend. At home, Scott douses himself in ice-cold water, desperate to stop the burn crawling under his skin. His hands shake, nails sharpening into claws. His teeth lengthen, his eyes glow amber. Staring at his own monstrous reflection, terror grips him. Meanwhile, Styles pounds on Scott's door, but Scott refuses to let him in. Then he learns Derek took Allison home. That's it. His last shred of control snaps. Fully transformed, he crashes through his window and tears into the woods. Tracking Allison's scent, he's stopped by Derek, but before Scott can react, a flashbang arrow detonates, blinding them. A second arrow pins Scott to a tree. Hunters, and leading them is Chris Argent. Derek fights them off, yanking Scott free. Once safe, he drops the bomb. Hunters have been after their kind for generations. The next day, Scott tries to patch things up with Allison. She forgives him, until her dad pulls up. That's when Scott sees his face. Chris Argent, the hunter who nearly killed him. Shortly after Wolf Moon, Scott panics in the locker room as Styles asks if he apologized to Allison. Scott admits she gave him a second chance, but freaks out, revealing her dad is the lead werewolf hunter who shot him. Styles calms him down, suggesting he focus on lacrosse. At practice, Scott is so distracted that he plays terribly. The stress plus taunts from Jackson and Coach Finstock push him over the edge. He rages out, tackles Jackson, and starts transforming, unaware that Derek is watching from the shadows. Realizing Scott is losing control, Styles drags him back to the locker room. When Scott fully shifts and attacks him, Styles blasts him with a fire extinguisher, snapping him back. Horrified, Scott realizes he nearly hurt his best friend. Styles warns that any spike in his pulse could trigger another shift, meaning he has to sit out Saturday's game. That night, Melissa tells Scott she took Saturday off to see his game. Unable to explain why he won't play, he tries to convince her not to come, but she insists. Later, Styles video calls Scott, revealing Jackson's injury means the team is relying on him. Scott's computer glitches. Then Styles texts, "It looks like someone's behind you." Scott turns to see Derek lurking. Derek pins him to the wall, warning that if Scott plays, he'll kill him himself because if the town learns what Scott is, they'll hunt them both. Scott tells Coach he cannot play in the upcoming game, citing personal issues. Coach assumes it is relationship drama or drugs, but Scott insists he is struggling with aggression. Coach refuses to accept his reasoning and warns that if he cannot handle the pressure, he will be benched. In the hallway, Allison tells Scott she is coming to his game and invites him to hang out afterward with Jackson, Lydia, and Styles. Later, in math class, Lydia confronts Scott about the rumor that he is not playing. When he confirms it, she warns that if both he and Jackson sit out, the team will lose, and she refuses to date losers. Scott insists he is protecting lives, but Lydia threatens to introduce Allison to rival players if he refuses to play. Styles has Scott use his werewolf hearing to eavesdrop on his father, who announces a 9:30 p.m. curfew due to the body found in the woods. Styles scoffs at the idea that his father is hunting a rabid animal while Derek remains free. Scott reminds him they cannot tell the sheriff about Derek, but Styles insists they should find the rest of the body. Down the hall, Lydia introduces Allison to other lacrosse players while giving Scott a pointed look. When Scott sees Allison wearing the jacket Derek stole, he aggressively questions her about Derek, making her uncomfortable. She becomes unsettled and leaves. Scott later tracks Derek to the Hale house, demanding that he stay away from Allison. Derek warns that if Scott loses control on the field and shifts in front of his mother and friends, his life will be ruined. That night, Scott tells Stiles he smelled blood at Derek's home and wants to find proof to get him arrested. However, he first needs Stiles to teach him how to play lacrosse without shifting, as he cannot miss the game. At the morgue, Scott takes in the scent of the half-body found in the woods while Stiles keeps watch. Jackson, after a cortisone shot, tells Lydia the doctor warned against making it a habit. Lydia insists he get another before the game. Scott tells Stiles the scent matches the one at the Hale house. Stiles suggests Derek buried the other half of the body there and questions Scott's real motive. When Scott reveals the body's legs had bite marks, Stiles concludes they need a shovel. Scott and Stiles wait for Derek to leave before sneaking into the yard. A fresh patch of dirt catches their attention, and they start digging, despite Scott's unease. The moment they pull up a burlap-wrapped object, Stiles unties the knots, revealing the front half of a dark brown wolf. Just as they consider leaving, Stiles spots a purple flower nearby and identifies it as wolfsbane. Scott's ignorance annoys him, but the irritation vanishes when he notices the plant is woven into a spiral of rope wrapped around the wolf's body. The second Stiles unwinds it, the body shifts, revealing the top half of a human woman, sending both into a horrified panic. The next morning, Derek is hauled off in cuffs as Scott and Stiles watch from a distance. Derek's glare burns into them as he is placed in the back seat of the cruiser. While the deputies search the crime scene, Stiles sneaks into the car, trying to act unbothered before immediately taking back his bravado. He presses Derek for answers, pointing out that the dead girl was a werewolf, but different from Scott. Derek doesn't explain, but warns that Scott shifting on the field will be a disaster, urging Stiles to stop him. Before Stiles can respond, his father yanks him out of the car, grilling him about how he found the body. Stiles' weak excuse contradicts his earlier lies, but Sheriff Stilinski lets him go with a warning. As they drive home, Scott flips through Stiles' werewolf books, finding nothing on wolfsbane rituals. His irritation flares when Stiles gets too excited, but the real problem hits when he starts gasping for air. Stiles' backpack stuffed with wolfsbane is making him sick. He tosses it out the window before disappearing. Stiles panics and calls emergency dispatch, but they hang up. Meanwhile, Scott, fully transformed, sneaks onto Allison's roof. As he leaps down, Argent's car hits him, forcing him back to human. Allison rushes out, horrified, but Scott awkwardly claims he was just stopping by before scrambling off. At the game, Jackson sabotages Scott, but when Coach demands someone pass to him, Scott's anger surges. His snarl forces an opponent to throw him the ball. He teeters on losing control until Allison's voice breaks through the noise, calming him enough to score the winning goal. Overwhelmed, he flees to the locker room. Stiles finds him later, but the good mood shatters when Stiles reveals the dead girl was Derek's sister, Laura Hale. Scott and Allison sneak out of school and into a bus where they share a romantic moment. As their passion intensifies, Scott's werewolf instincts kick in, and he struggles to control his transformation. He pulls away, warning Allison to leave, but she panics when she sees his monstrous form. She tries to escape, but the bus doors are jammed, and Scott attacks her. The next day, Scott wakes up and realizes it was just a dream, one so vivid that he fears it might be a warning. He confides in Stiles, who jokes that there's no lycanthropy for beginners class, but agrees it's concerning. When they arrive at school, they find a crime scene in the bus bay, where deputies investigate a blood-covered bus with its back door torn off. This eerily matches Scott's nightmare, making him fear that he actually attacked someone in his sleep. Panicking, Scott desperately searches for Allison, but she hasn't responded to his texts. His frustration causes him to dent a locker with his fist. Just as he's about to leave, he bumps into Allison, who is completely fine. Relieved, he walks with her to class, unaware that Jackson later finds his ruined locker door. During chemistry, Scott and Stiles discuss the attack, with Stiles suggesting Scott might have killed an animal, not a person. Their conversation is cut short when they see paramedics wheeling out a severely mauled but alive man. At lunch, Stiles reassures Scott that the victim survived, and Scott believes Derek might be able to help him control his transformations. Their friends join the conversation, speculating about the attack. Danny suggests a cougar was responsible, while Jackson coldly assumes the victim was a drug addict. Stiles corrects him, revealing the man was Garrison Myers, a bus driver Scott remembers from childhood. Lydia abruptly changes the subject, announcing that she and Jackson are crashing Scott and Allison's date. Though Allison seems annoyed, Scott agrees, wanting to spend time with her. When Jackson mocks his bowling skills, Scott lies, claiming he's great at it. Stiles later calls Scott out for his terrible bowling skills and continues worrying about Scott losing control. Their conversation shifts when Stiles frets about Danny not finding him attractive, but Scott is too focused on whether he actually hurt someone to pay attention. At work, Scott is on edge when Sheriff Stilinski arrives at the clinic, fearing he's a suspect. However, the sheriff is only there to get his K9 unit stitches removed, easing Scott's nerves for now. Sheriff Stalinsky shows Dr. Deaton photos of the recent attack, revealing they found wolf hairs on Laura Hale's body. Scott nervously points out that wolves haven't been in California for decades, but Deaton explains they can migrate from other states. He also describes how wolves attack prey, deepening Scott's fear. Scott later visits the hospital to bring dinner to his mother, but she immediately realizes he's trying to butter her up for car privileges. While leaving, Scott catches Myers' scent and follows it to his hospital room. Myers, barely conscious, grabs Scott's sleeve and mumbles incoherently, further convincing Scott that he's responsible. Meanwhile, a deputy checks out the Hale house ruins, but is terrified by Derek Hale, who silently watches from the shadows. Derek scares the deputy's canine companion, forcing the officer to leave. Soon after, Scott arrives, pleading for Derek's help. Derek bluntly tells him that he will hurt and possibly kill someone, but offers to teach him control, for a price. To uncover the truth, Derek instructs Scott to use his senses at the bus crime scene. That night, Scott sneaks onto the bus with Stiles as lookout. Using his heightened senses, Scott has fragmented flashbacks of the attack. He remembers the Alpha calling him waking up and running into the night. And, most crucially, he wasn't attacking Myers. He was trying to protect him and was injured in the process. Before Scott can process it, police cruisers approach, forcing him to flee with Stiles. Scott realizes the Alpha was behind the attack, but he still mistakenly believes it's Derek. Stiles jokes that this proves Scott isn't a killer and is relieved for his own safety. Scott, now confident, looks forward to his date with Allison. Meanwhile, Lydia helps Allison pick an outfit, criticizing her fashion sense. Chris Argent walks in unannounced, annoying Allison. Lydia, however, flirts with him, much to Allison's frustration. Chris enforces a strict curfew due to an alleged wild animal attacking people, but Allison, frustrated with her father's control, sneaks out through her window despite Lydia's disbelief. At the bowling alley, Scott, Allison, Lydia, and Jackson play, with Jackson excelling, while Scott struggles at first. Allison encourages Scott, even telling him to imagine her naked, which oddly helps him bowl a strike. Lydia pretends to be bad, but eventually reveals her skill, annoying Jackson. Meanwhile, Derek gets harassed by Chris Argent and his fellow hunters at a gas station. Chris makes veiled threats about Derek's family before a hunter smashes his car window. Derek realizes they are fully aware of his werewolf identity and history. Back at the bowling alley, Scott starts winning, which enrages Jackson, who storms off to play pinball. Scott tries to smooth things over, but Jackson remains suspicious, convinced Scott cheated, and vowing to uncover his secret. At the hospital, Derek visits Garrison Myers, who panics upon recognizing him and repeatedly apologizes before dying of cardiac arrest. Melissa McCall, exhausted from her shift, tries to save him, but fails. After walking Allison home, Scott nervously asks to see her again. She agrees, preferring a one-on-one date next time. They share a kiss before parting ways, unaware that Chris Argent is watching from inside. At Scott's house, Stiles sneaks in through the window, nearly getting hit by Melissa, who is fed up with their antics. She reminds them of the curfew before heading to bed. Stiles then informs Scott that Garrison has died. Furious, Scott confronts Derek at the Hale house, accusing him of murder. Derek denies it, revealing that his sister Laura was killed and used as bait to lure him back to Beacon Hills. Scott, still convinced Derek is guilty, threatens to expose him to the sheriff. Scott transforms into a werewolf after Derek shoves him down the stairs. Enraged, he throws Derek through a wall, but Derek quickly recovers and transforms into his own werewolf form. The two fight, with Derek overpowering Scott, eventually forcing him back into human form. Derek then reveals that neither of them killed Garrison, and that Scott was bitten by an alpha, not him. Shocked, Scott learns that an alpha werewolf is in town, and Derek needs his help to stop it. Since the alpha bit Scott, he is part of its pack, making him the one the alpha seeks. Kate Argent arrives in Beacon Hills, laughing at a radio report about animal attacks. As she drives, the alpha werewolf chases her, eventually jumping onto her SUV. It smashes through the window and tries to pull her out, but she grabs a shotgun and fires through the roof, hitting the alpha. It retreats, and Kate escapes, landing in a defensive stance. She shouts a challenge before the scene shifts. Scott, in bed, wakes up upon hearing gunshots and the alpha's howl. He quickly gets dressed and sneaks out of the house. Meanwhile, Kate stops in the warehouse district, swapping her shotgun for a sniper rifle loaded with special bullets. At the Argent house, Chris Argent prepares to leave, telling his daughter Allison that Kate needs a ride due to a flat tire, though he's clearly lying. Derek Hale tracks the alpha's blood trail and sees it watching him from a warehouse roof. The alpha growls and takes off, prompting Derek to follow. Kate, armed with her rifle, moves in while Derek leaps from rooftop to rooftop. She takes a shot, hitting Derek's forearm midair. He crashes onto an awning before hitting the ground hard. Chris arrives and orders Kate into the car. Meanwhile, Scott, hiding nearby, listens in as Kate explains that 2 werewolves attacked her and that the one she shot has 48 hours to live. Derek, now wounded behind the warehouse, sees his injury glowing bluish-purple and smoking. His body isn't healing. The next morning, Kate and Allison excitedly reunite. When Allison picks up one of Kate's bags, Kate aggressively stops her, apologizing awkwardly. Allison, suspicious, notices Kate lying about her car's condition but doesn't call her out. At school, Scott updates Stiles on the situation. Stiles asks key questions. Who is the Alpha? Did it kill the bus driver? Does Allison's dad know? Scott has no answers. His attention shifts when he gets a D- on a test. And Stiles jokes about his priorities, urging him to take advantage of his study session with Allison. Derek, visibly unwell, stumbles through the hallway and corners Jackson, demanding to know Scott's whereabouts. Jackson mistakes Derek for a steroid dealer, mocking his sickly appearance. Losing patience, Derek grabs Jackson's neck, accidentally stabbing him with his claws before realizing his loss of control and rushing away. Derek, overhearing Allison seeking Lydia's advice about sex, realizes where to find Scott. After school, he intercepts Stiles in the parking lot and gets Scott's attention. Derek reveals he was shot with a special bullet and can't heal, making Scott realize Kate was talking about him when she mentioned a werewolf dying in 48 hours. To avoid suspicion, they get Derek into Stiles' Jeep, and Derek insists Scott must find out what kind of bullet Kate used while studying at Allison's house. Though hesitant, Scott agrees, leaving Stiles to deal with an increasingly weak Derek. Scott confirms his study plans with Allison, who questions his interaction with Derek. He dismisses it as giving Derek a ride before heading to her house. When he arrives, his rushed and suspicious behavior raises Allison's doubts, but he claims he's stressed about school. Once inside, studying quickly turns into making out on her bed. Mid-kiss, Scott loses control, his claws extending, but he regains composure before Allison notices. Stiles calls him, and though he initially ignores it, he steps away to return the call. Meanwhile, Stiles drives with a deteriorating Derek, who refuses to go home, fearing the hunters. When Stiles asks if he's dying, Derek hints at a last resort while observing his worsening wound, now leaking blackened blood. Stiles, disgusted, nearly kicks him out, but Derek's threat forces him to continue driving. Back at Allison's, Scott finds a photo of her with Kate, learning she's Allison's beloved aunt. When he asks about her skills, Allison reveals her past as a nationally ranked archer. She takes Scott to the garage, shows off her bow, and downplays the presence of numerous locked-up firearms, explaining her father is a legal arms dealer. Scott, knowing Argent is a hunter, nervously asks if she plans to join the family business, but Allison playfully flirts instead. They resume making out, only to be interrupted by Argent and Kate's return. Though they try to hide, Argent catches them and assigns them grocery duty. Argent subtly pressures Scott to leave, but Kate invites him to stay for dinner. At the table, Argent tests Scott with alcohol, which he declines, while Kate casually chats about lacrosse. Scott excuses himself to take Stiles' call, who is struggling with Derek's worsening condition. Scott instructs him to take Derek to the animal clinic. Derek, seizing the phone, reminds Scott he's running out of time to find the bullet. When Scott hesitates, Derek warns him the Alpha will call him again and next time he'll have to kill or be killed. Scott sneaks into Kate's room during a tense family dinner and finds sniper rifle rounds used against Derek, confirming his suspicions. He snaps a photo of the wooden box they were in and sends it to Stiles, who identifies the rounds as containing Nordic blue monkshood, a rare strain of wolfsbane. Derek, suffering from a severe wolfsbane infection, instructs Stiles to get a bullet from Scott, or he will die. Scott reluctantly retrieves one and prepares to leave, but Kate insists he stay for dessert. Chris Argent uses the opportunity to test Scott, subtly hinting at werewolves in a speech about rabid dogs. At the animal clinic, Derek's condition worsens. His infected veins spread up his arm, prompting him to demand Stiles amputate it before the infection reaches his heart. Stiles panics at the idea, nearly fainting, but Derek threatens him into compliance. Meanwhile, Scott prepares to leave the Argent house, but Kate accuses him of taking something from her bag. Before she can search him, Allison intervenes, pulling out a condom she had taken from Kate's bag earlier, successfully deflecting suspicion. Scott rushes to the clinic with the bullet, just in time to stop Stiles from sawing off Derek's arm. However, when Derek tries to use the bullet, he collapses, and the bullet rolls into a vent. Scott struggles to retrieve it, but eventually extends his claws to reach it. Stiles wakes Derek with a punch, and Derek burns the wolfsbane inside the bullet before rubbing the ashes into his wound, finally healing himself. With Derek's life saved, Scott demands that he leave them alone, even threatening to expose everything to the Argents. In response, Derek takes Scott to visit his uncle Peter Hale, the only survivor of the Hale family massacre. He reveals that the Argents set the fire that killed his family, breaking their supposed code by killing humans as well. Scott struggles to believe this, but begins to question Allison's role in the family's dark history. Later, Kate and Chris discuss the recent werewolf sightings. While Chris insists they follow the code, Kate hints at her involvement in the Hale fire. Her smirk as she lights a match in the fireplace suggests she may have been the one responsible for the massacre, though Chris remains unaware. Jackson and Lydia sit in Lydia's car, debating which movie to rent. Jackson begs to watch Hoosiers, but Lydia refuses, making Jackson reluctantly fetch the notebook instead. Inside the store, Jackson finds an employee, Levesque, dead with his throat ripped out. Shocked, he accidentally knocks over a ladder, causing a fluorescent light to crash, cutting the store's power. Outside, Lydia, unaware of the chaos, takes selfies. Inside, Jackson spots the alpha werewolf lurking in the shadows. The alpha knocks over shelves like dominoes, forcing Jackson to dodge. Just as the alpha closes in, it notices glowing claw marks on Jackson's neck and abruptly flees. Jackson, terrified, smashes through the store's glass doors, startling Lydia, who unknowingly captures the fleeing werewolf on her phone. Meanwhile, Sheriff Stilinski and Stiles are having dinner when they receive a homicide call. They arrive at the crime scene, where paramedics check on Jackson and Lydia. The sheriff insists Jackson get medical attention, but Jackson snaps, calling him a minimum-wage rent-a-cop. Stiles is both horrified and amazed when he sees Levesque's body being wheeled out. On the store's rooftop, Scott and Derek watch the aftermath. Scott struggles to understand the alpha's motives, questioning if all werewolves are killers. Derek clarifies that werewolves are predators, not murderers, and vows to uncover the alpha's reasons for killing. As they leave, a red spiral appears on the rooftop, marking the alpha's presence. Later, Scott and Derek return to the Hale house, where Scott complains about balancing school and werewolf problems. Derek warns that the alpha is targeting Scott for his pack, and that time is running out before the next full moon. To train Scott, Derek breaks his arm, attempting to teach him how to control his wolf form under pain, but Scott fails. At home, Kate gives Allison an early birthday present, a silver pendant featuring a wolf and a fleur-de-lis. She tells Allison to research the symbol, hinting at the family's mysterious history. At school, Allison opens her locker to find helium balloons spilling out, clearly embarrassed. Scott sees and learns it's her birthday, deciding they should ditch school to celebrate. In chemistry class, the teacher announces mandatory parent-teacher conferences for students with low grades, including Scott. Stiles questions Danny about Lydia and Jackson's whereabouts the previous night, but Danny knows little. Stiles, flustered, randomly asks Danny if he finds him attractive, then panics so much he falls out of his chair. Scott and Allison sneak off in her car, hesitant about skipping school, but ultimately deciding to go through with it. Meanwhile, in the locker room, Derek confronts Jackson, demanding to know what he saw at the video store. Jackson denies seeing anything, but Derek pins him against the lockers, listening to his heartbeat to test if he's lying. Before leaving, Derek warns Jackson to get his mysterious claw marks checked. Scott and Allison spend the day at the Beacon Hills Preserve, flirting and growing closer. At the Martin house, Natalie Martin tells Lydia that Stiles is there to see her. Lydia, still under the effects of anti-anxiety medication, mumbles about Stiles. When Stiles arrives, he asks Lydia what she saw during the attack on the video rental store. She responds that she saw a mountain lion, which Stiles realizes is just her repeating what the police told her. Meanwhile, Scott and Allison walk through the woods, with Allison briefly texting Lydia before turning off her phone. Still dazed, Lydia asks Stiles to stay, and he is momentarily excited when she leans toward him as if to kiss him, until she calls him Jackson. Frustrated, Stiles watches as she passes out. He notices her phone buzzing and sees that she received a video of the alpha running out of the video store, captured while she was taking selfies. In the woods near the Hale House ruins, Kate Argent and her fellow hunters approach. Despite being told to wait for Chris, Kate is impatient. One hunter jokes about Derek, and Kate cruelly suggests more provocative insults. Inside the house, Derek is training when gunfire suddenly blasts through the walls. He fights off two hunters but is struck with a high-voltage taser by Kate, who mocks him and considers whether to kill him or seduce him. At the Stilinski house, Stiles panics over the video he found on Lydia's phone and tries to contact Scott, who has turned off his phone. Sheriff Stilinski enters, hoping for good news regarding Stiles' academics, but Stiles' vague response suggests otherwise. Sheriff, seemingly expecting disappointment, leaves, while Stiles desperately waits for Scott to call back. Back at the Hale house, Kate shocks Derek again with a taser, before revealing a shocking truth. She and the hunters did not kill Laura Hale. She explains that the bite marks on Laura's body indicate the alpha was responsible. Kate offers to help kill the alpha if Derek identifies him, but when she realizes he has no idea who it is, she dismisses him as useless and attempts to shoot him. Derek escapes into the woods at super speed. At the Beacon Hills Animal Clinic, Alan Bitten leaves a voicemail for Scott, concerned about his absence. Sheriff Stilinski arrives, seeking Ditten's help regarding the video store attack. Bitten, nervous, claims to be no expert, but Sheriff points out that Bitten was previously certain the attacker was a mountain lion. Sheriff then reveals stills from surveillance footage showing the alpha transitioning from running on all fours to walking upright. Uncomfortable, Bitten avoids further discussion and excuses himself to tend to a sick dog. In the preserve, Allison tells Scott that her birthday has been kind of perfect. Scott jokes that he can tell when she lies because she touches her eyebrow. Allison wishes her parents weren't coming home so she and Scott could spend more time together. Suddenly, Scott remembers that he was supposed to attend the parent-teacher conference, realizing he's in trouble due to his poor grades. At the high school, the parents meet with teachers. Mr. Harris discusses Jackson with Mr. Whitmore, noting Jackson's intense drive and assumption that it stems from his adoption. Meanwhile, Lydia's parents bicker, assuming she has academic issues. But Ms. Ramsey reveals that Lydia is exceptionally gifted, with a GPA over 5.0 and strong leadership potential. Sheriff Stilinski meets with Coach Finstock, who is baffled by Styles' real name and calls him intelligent but unfocused. He humorously recalls Styles' midterm answer about male circumcision, much to the sheriff's embarrassment. Melissa McCall, frustrated by Scott's behavior, orders him to get to the school immediately. Chris and Victoria Argent meet with Ms. Ramsey, who praises Allison for adjusting well despite frequent relocations. Victoria insists they have an open relationship with Allison. When the teacher mentions Allison missed school, Chris is shocked and becomes concerned. Allison and Scott drive back to school while Melissa, furious over Scott's absence, leaves him a voicemail. Chris and Victoria also search for Allison, concerned about her behavior. Melissa overhears their conversation and approaches them, revealing she is Scott's mother. Chris responds coldly, accusing Scott of kidnapping Allison. However, their argument halts when they see Scott and Allison arriving. Melissa immediately confronts Scott, demanding to know where he has been. Scott nervously says nowhere, confirming Melissa's suspicion that he skipped school. Allison tries to defend him, but Chris orders her into the car. Suddenly, screams erupt as people flee the school parking lot in panic. Scott senses something and moves to investigate, while Allison looks around, noticing the chaos. Chris retrieves a gun, sensing danger, while people scatter, terrified. Scott follows his instincts toward the source of the disturbance, while Allison, Chris, and others brace for whatever is coming. Scott runs through a parking garage, chased by a werewolf, but it's just Derek testing him. Scott asks Derek to teach him how to control his werewolf side. Derek agrees, but tells Scott to stay away from Allison because she's a distraction. Scott promises, but goes to see her anyway. Later, Scott comes face to face with the alpha werewolf, who scratches a spiral on his window, just like the one on Derek's sister's grave. Scott tells Derek, and Derek is clearly shaken. Since Scott's anger triggers his transformations, Styles decides to help him stay calm. They figure out that Allison is the only one who keeps Scott in control. Meanwhile, Jackson is freaked out by the claw marks on his neck and starts having weird hallucinations. Derek goes to see his uncle, who was burned in the fire, to ask about the alpha, but gets no answers. He later finds a news article about a dead deer with a spiral carved into its fur. The town vet handled the case, so Derek goes to see him. When the vet refuses to talk, Derek loses his patience and knocks him out, just as Scott arrives and stops him. Scott tells Derek to meet him at school that night. He and Styles sneak in and use the PA system to call the alpha. Derek shows up with the unconscious vet in his car, but before they can figure anything out, the alpha grabs Derek and slams him into a wall, knocking him out cold. Scott and Styles panic and run inside, locking themselves in the school. They don't know if Derek is alive, and the alpha is still out there, hunting them. Scott and Styles are trapped in the school, trying to figure out how to escape without getting ripped apart by the alpha werewolf. But the alpha isn't letting them go so easily. It blocks every exit and straight up murders the janitor. Meanwhile, Allison gets a weird text from Scott telling her to meet him at the school. She shows up with Jackson and Lydia, only to find themselves trapped in the cafeteria. Scott realizes he never sent that text. Now, everyone's demanding answers. Panicking, Scott lies. He says Derek is the one after them. Styles, not wanting to risk it anymore, calls his dad, the sheriff. The group makes a run for a science classroom, where they find a locked door leading to a fire escape. They need the janitor's keys. Scott tracks the janitor's scent to the gym and finds his body shoved under the bleachers. But before he can grab the keys, the alpha appears. It lets out a bone-shaking howl, forcing Scott to transform against his will. Jackson, still messed up from his scratches, reacts too. Scott stumbles back to the classroom in full werewolf mode. barely in control. Just as he's about to lose it completely, Allison's voice cuts through his rage, snapping him back. He changes back to normal just in time for the cops to bust in. Stiles' dad is here and they're finally safe. Outside, Scott sees the vet, perfectly fine like nothing ever happened. Then it hits him. The Alpha never planned to kill them. It wanted Scott to do it. The whole thing was a setup to push Scott into slaughtering his own friends, forcing him into the Alpha's pack. And the worst part? Deep down, Scott actually wanted to kill them all when he transformed. That's enough for Allison. She's done. If she can't trust Scott, she can't be with him. Just like that, she breaks up with him. Stiles takes Scott into the woods to get drunk, hoping to cheer him up after his breakup with Allison. But things get messy when two guys show up and take their bottle. Scott, already on edge because of the full moon coming, gets pissed. Not long after, the Alpha Werewolf shows up and kills the two men. At school, Scott starts acting weird, hallucinating, losing control, and just not being himself. He and Stiles decide to lock Scott up during the full moon so he doesn't end up hurting someone. Before lacrosse practice, Stiles asks Scott to find out if Lydia likes him, but when Scott talks to Lydia, he only asks about Allison. Lydia dodges the question and instead starts making out with him. Scott later lies to Stiles about it and plays aggressively during practice. Meanwhile, Allison and Jackson talk and agree that Derek wasn't the one who attacked them. That night, Stiles cuffs Scott to a radiator, partly to keep him from hurting anyone and partly as payback for kissing Lydia. But as the full moon rises, Scott completely loses it. He transforms, breaks free, and goes after Jackson and Allison. Just before Scott can attack, Derek, who is very much alive, takes him down and stops him. At the same time, the Argents suspect there's another beta werewolf in town besides Derek. Later, when Scott returns to normal, he's freaked out and asks Derek if there's a cure. Derek tells him there might be one. He'd have to kill the werewolf who bit him. Meanwhile, Jackson finds a claw on his car, left by Scott, and realizes it matches a hole in Scott's lacrosse glove from before. Something's definitely up. Night settled over Beacon Hills High School. Mr. Harris sat alone, staring at a list of people with his last name. Every name had a red cross next to it, except his. The sight made him uneasy. A presence loomed behind him. A wet claw was visible, followed by a voice. Mr. Harris stayed frozen, partly from fear, partly from denial. He refused to turn around, but the figure taunted him, accusing him of knowing more than he admitted. When he didn't respond, the figure grew aggressive, throwing chairs. Just as things escalated, Derek appeared and told Harris to duck. Ironic, considering Derek often mocked his students for lacking common sense. Sirens cut through the night. Derek, still a wanted fugitive, knew the police weren't on his side. He ran. His escape was fast, outrunning cars with inhuman speed. The police chased him, but they weren't alone. Chris Argent was after him. Kate Argent also joined the pursuit, but the car she followed wasn't Derek's. It was Scott and Stiles running a diversion. Scott, not known for reckless driving, struggled with the high-speed chase. Chris fired shots, but Scott reached Derek first. Derek jumped into the car, and they sped off. Frustration burned in Derek. He had been close to catching the Alpha before the police showed up, and now, thanks to Scott, he was the most wanted man in the state. His last conversation with his sister had revealed two things: a man named Harris and a symbol. The next day, Scott worried about how to get Allison's necklace. Stiles, ever optimistic, suggested a bold plan: win Allison over with honesty. Scott lacked the courage for that. The plan was clear: get the necklace, find the Alpha, get cured, and win Allison back. But with Scott's slow reactions, this would likely drag out for the rest of the season. Meanwhile, Jackson lay on an examination table as a doctor inspected the wounds on his neck. Nightmares had haunted him, but the real horror came when the doctor used a tool to extract a vine of bloody wolfsbane from his wound. Then he woke up. Just a dream. In reality, the doctor dismissed his injuries as minor and prescribed antibiotics for aconite poisoning. Jackson, confused, realized he somehow knew what aconite was without ever learning it. Determined to figure it out, Jackson charmed Melissa McCall into letting him use a hospital computer. He searched for wolfsbane. His suspicions grew. At school, Jackson confronted Scott, claiming to know his secret. He wanted to become a werewolf and threatened to expose Scott if he refused to help. This made getting the necklace even more urgent. Scott tried to sit next to Allison, but Lydia, back to her usual self, blocked him. As a weak attempt to reconnect, Scott sent Allison old photos of them together. It only made things worse. A new plan formed: stealing the necklace. Jackson, meanwhile, tested Scott's patience, mocking his lacrosse skills and his breakup with Allison. Scott, frustrated, snapped his lunch tray in half. Jackson smirked and took a loud bite from his apple. Later, Jackson and Allison swam in the school pool. Jackson, ever confident, joked about his cheekbones, giving him an advantage. Meanwhile, Scott searched Allison's bag, but found nothing. In the hallway, Jackson walked confidently until Lydia stopped him, demanding an explanation for a text he had sent. He had asked for his spare house key back, coldly announcing their relationship was over. Lydia, shocked, questioned him, but Jackson dismissed her as dead weight. At home, Stiles found Derek waiting in his room. When his father nearly walked in, Stiles distracted him with small talk about lacrosse. Once alone, he turned to Danny for help, tracing an ominous text sent to Allison. Danny refused at first, but Stiles had an idea: get Derek to pose as his cousin Miguel and flex for Danny's amusement. Derek, unimpressed, played along. It worked. Danny agreed to help, but needed more details about the text. Scott later snuck into Allison's bedroom and found the necklace being used as a bookmark in an old werewolf hunter history book. Allison had circled things inside, making Scott wonder if she even knew its real importance. Meanwhile, Danny traced the ominous text to a computer at Beacon Hills Hospital, one registered to Melissa McCall. As Scott left the Argent home, Chris stopped him, inviting him in for a drink. It wasn't hospitality. It was an interrogation about Derek. Allison returned just in time to overhear Scott insist that he only wanted to protect her. He left without noticing her presence. Elsewhere, Allison went for a run and stumbled upon Derek's abandoned house. She entered, only for Kate to appear. Their conversation hinted at something darker, an unspoken past between Kate and Derek, suggesting that the real monster might not be Derek after all. At the hospital, Stiles looked for Melissa but discovered something horrifying. Peter Hale's bed was empty. The supposedly comatose Peter was the Alpha. Worse, the nurse who had been caring for him was the one who had sent the ominous text. Her intentions were far from innocent. Before she could act, Derek knocked her unconscious. Peter, unbothered, expressed mild disappointment. Derek wasn't amused, calling her out as Peter's willing accomplice. The fight that followed wasn't even close. Peter, stronger and faster, tossed Derek around with ease. Grabbing him by the throat, he spoke of his suffering. The years spent healing, cell by cell. Becoming an alpha had accelerated his recovery, something he couldn't control. He wanted understanding, not forgiveness. At the police station, Sheriff Stilinski listened to Mr. Harris, but his mind was on the clock, eager to make it to Stiles' first lacrosse game. Harris recounted a drunken conversation from years ago with a young woman who had asked too many questions about fire science. A week later, the Hale house burned down. He hadn't spoken up because he didn't want to be involved. He never learned the woman's name, but he remembered one detail: the necklace she wore, a family heirloom. Harris provided the final clue. The girl wearing that necklace wasn't just an arsonist, she was a murderer. Stiles digs through his dad's research to figure out what's up with the Alpha Werewolf's victims. Turns out, the Alpha has been targeting people connected to the fire that killed Derek's family. Meanwhile, Jackson starts looking real suspicious, and Allison's dad presses him for answers, thinking he might be a beta werewolf. Scott's pissed about this, but Jackson is still obsessed with becoming a werewolf himself. Scott is even more shocked when Derek and his uncle suddenly want him to join the pack. What's worse, Derek seems to be siding with the Alpha now. Before Scott can even process that, the Alpha stabs him in the neck, sending him into some intense flashbacks showing him what really happened during the fire and the murders. While searching for her missing necklace, Allison stumbles across a sharp arrow tip left behind by Kate. She and Lydia head to the woods to test it out. When she sees someone moving in the dark, she panics and zaps them with a taser, only to realize it's Scott. He was just trying to return her necklace. She apologizes, but it's awkward. Later, Allison visits Scott's house to talk. While she's there, they notice Scott's mom, Melissa, getting ready for a date. When Scott opens the door, his stomach drops. The date is with the Alpha Werewolf. The Alpha's plan is to turn Melissa into a werewolf to force Scott into the pack. Scott ditches Allison in his room and follows his mom, barely stopping the Alpha's plan before it's too late. Back at the Hale property, Scott jumps in to save Jackson from getting killed, but things spiral fast. Kate shows up, shoots Scott, and the town vet secretly hauls him back to his clinic. While patching Scott up, the vet casually shocks everyone. He mostly works with cats and dogs, and sometimes werewolves too. Meanwhile, Kate drops a bomb of her own. She spills the family secret to Allison. And just to make things worse, she's got Derek chained to a wall, torturing him. The winter formal is coming up, and Kate decides it's time to give Allison a crash course on werewolves and hunters, using Derek as a live example. Meanwhile, Scott is still recovering at the vet's clinic when Peter rudely barges in, demanding Scott. The vet stands his ground, refusing to hand Scott over. Peter, unable to cross the mountain ash barrier, throws a tantrum, literally launching furniture at the wall. Back at school, Coach Finstock drops some bad news. Scott's grades are so bad he can't go to the dance. This is a huge problem since the Alpha Werewolf is targeting Allison. Desperate, Scott pressures Jackson into taking Allison to the dance for protection. Jackson refuses at first, but Scott hulks out just enough to scare him into saying yes. Meanwhile, Allison ropes Lydia into taking Stiles. During a shopping trip for the dance, Peter creeps up on Allison, but Scott quickly pulls her away before anything weird happens. That night, Kate taunts Derek, revealing that they were once in a relationship before she betrayed him. She also figures out that Scott is the second beta werewolf. At the dance, Jackson gets wasted and barely pays attention to Allison. Stiles, on the other hand, is killing it with Lydia, though she's more focused on keeping an eye on Jackson. Scott sneaks in anyway and confesses his love to Allison, which leads to a sweet kiss. Jackson, now completely hammered, stumbles into the woods and spots what he thinks is a werewolf. He demands to be turned, only to realize, too late, that the shadows belong to werewolf hunters, led by Mr. Argent. Panicked, Jackson spills the truth: Scott is the werewolf. Meanwhile, Lydia goes looking for Jackson but ends up in the wrong place at the worst time. Peter attacks her viciously. Stiles finds Jackson wandering in a daze, completely out of it. Peter then threatens to kill Lydia unless Stiles tells him where Derek is. Scott and Allison sneak off to the school buses for some privacy. Allison steps inside and motions for Scott to follow, but before he can, bam! Chris Argent's car slams into him, pinning him between two vehicles. As Scott struggles, he transforms right in front of Allison. She stares in shock, realizing the truth. Scott jumps away as Allison freaks out over what she just saw. She stumbles off the school bus, collapsing into her dad's arms. Meanwhile, Scott hides in the woods, crying. On the football field, Peter forces Stiles to leave Lydia behind, but he does let him call Jackson to get her medical help. Peter also warns that if Lydia survives the bite, she'll turn into a werewolf. At the Argent house, Chris rips into Kate for leaving so many clues for Allison to find. He's furious that she dragged Allison into their werewolf hunting business. He orders Kate to take Allison and leave town for her safety. Over at the hospital, Sheriff Stilinski suspects Jackson of hurting Lydia until he realizes Stiles brought her as his date. Across town, Peter corners Stiles and forces him to track Scott's phone to find Derek. Stiles even takes a random moment to rant about Max, but in the end, he figures out Derek is being held under the Argent house. Peter offers to turn Stiles into a werewolf, but Stiles turns him down. As Peter leaves, he smirks, saying Stiles wants the power, he just won't admit it. Scott finds Derek but refuses to free him unless Derek helps take down Peter. To convince him, Scott shows proof that Peter killed Derek's sister on purpose to become the Alpha. Furious, Derek breaks out of his last chain himself and agrees to help. At the hospital, Stiles visits Lydia and learns new info from his dad. Kate was the one who set the Hale house on fire. Meanwhile, Jackson and Stiles get captured by Mr. Argent and his hunters, but Stiles manages to convince Argent that Kate was the real monster, not the werewolves. Across town, Kate and Allison ambush Scott and Derek with explosive crossbow arrows, taking them down. Kate prepares to kill them both, shooting Derek first. But before she can shoot Scott, despite Allison begging her not to, Chris shows up and forces Kate to stand down. Then Peter crashes the scene. He wipes out the hunters before dragging Kate inside. Allison follows and watches in horror as Peter slits Kate's throat for murdering his family. Before Peter can turn on her, Scott and Derek jump in for a 2-on-1 fight. Outside, Stiles and Jackson speed up in a car just as Scott is losing. Stiles chucks a Molotov cocktail at Peter, and Allison lights it up with a crossbow arrow. Even Jackson joins in, chucking his beer bottle into the flames. The Alpha collapses, burning up, and transforms back into a crispy Peter Hale. Scott and Allison kiss, promising to stay together. But just as Scott begs to be cured, Derek steps out of the house and kills Peter, becoming the new Alpha werewolf. Later, Jackson finds Derek and begs to be turned. Derek smirks and bares his fangs before lunging at him. At the hospital, Scott and Stiles visit Lydia, but notice something weird. She isn't healing fast, and she hasn't turned into a werewolf. Back at the Argent house, Chris and his wife realize the town will turn on them, now that Kate's crimes are exposed. But with more werewolf hunters on the way, they seem less worried about Scott now. On the rooftop, Scott holds Allison in his arms as they watch the stars, finally finding a moment of peace. Then we see Jackson crawling out of a pond in the forest. His shirt is ripped, and he has a big bite mark on his side. Scott is running on all fours through the trees. He is just a regular high school kid, except he's a werewolf. Scott's dating Allison Argent, a wild archer from a family of werewolf hunters. She's stuck between loving Scott and dealing with her family's messed up past. Her dad, Chris Argent, is an experienced hunter who follows a strict code, but he's starting to question things. Her grandpa, Gerard, doesn't care about rules. He's out for blood and wants to wipe out all werewolves. He remembers the time when Chris Argent pointed a gun at him, and Allison begged her dad not to shoot. She promised not to see Scott again if he let him go. But now, Scott is heading to her house, trying to sneak in some time with her while her parents are out. At the hospital, Scott's friend Stiles is passed out in a waiting room chair with a smiley balloon tied to it. Lydia Martin looks like just a popular pretty girl, but she's secretly super smart and going through some freaky changes. She wakes up feeling fine and gets ready to take a shower. Her dad talks to Melissa McCall and finds out that Stiles has been there all weekend. At Allison's house, Scott hears an SUV pulling up. The Argents are back. He hides outside the window. Victoria walks in without knocking. She senses something is off and checks the closet and the window. But Scott's already climbed up to the roof. Lydia steps into the shower, but nasty black water starts bubbling up from the drain. Stiles is messing with a candy machine that's jammed. He shakes it until it crashes loudly. Lydia hears the sound. She tries to fix the drain but pulls up a bunch of dark hair. The water keeps rising. Suddenly, a burned hand grabs her from the drain. She screams. Her dad, Melissa, and Stiles rush in, but she's gone. The tub's filled with clear water and the window is open. Her scream echoes across town. Scott hears it from the roof and knows it's Lydia. Later, Sheriff Stilinski talks to Lydia's dad and Melissa. He tells Stiles to go home, but Stiles takes Lydia's hospital gown with him. Scott and Allison meet him outside. Allison says her family is already out searching. Scott catches Lydia's scent and starts tracking her. In a graveyard, Isaac is using a backhoe to dig up Kate Argent's grave. He hears something nearby. The machine flips, and he falls into the grave. He sees something digging into another grave. There's a growl, and the backhoe gets lifted up. Derek is standing there, and Scott, Allison, and Stiles follow Lydia's trail to the burned-down Hale house. She's not there, but they find a tripwire. Stiles accidentally sets it off, and Scott gets trapped in the air. Hunters show up. Chris Argent is with them. Stiles and Allison hide. Chris says he thinks Lydia might be a werewolf and threatens Scott again. The next day, Sheriff Stilinski questions Isaac and his dad. Isaac lies and says nothing happened, but then admits someone took a liver from a corpse. At school, Scott and Stiles try to figure out where Lydia could have gone. Jackson picks on a homeless guy near the dumpsters. In chemistry class, Stiles gets detention for talking. Meanwhile, black liquid starts leaking from Jackson's nose. He runs to the bathroom, but it won't stop. Derek finds him there. Jackson says he doesn't want to join Derek's pack. Now the liquid is pouring from his ears, too. Derek tells him that his body is rejecting the bite. During detention, Mr. Harris warns Stiles that he's going to stay on his back all year because of what happened with Kate Argent. Later, at Kate's funeral, Gerard arrives and picks on a student. He meets Allison, who doesn't remember him. Scott and Stiles watch from behind a grave, but get caught. Sheriff Stilinski puts them in his patrol car. On the radio, they hear about an ambulance attack. Scott goes looking again, but finds another werewolf instead. Lydia walks out of the woods with no clothes on and asks for something to wear. The unknown werewolf ends up caught in a snare and hangs from a tree. Scott tries to help, but Derek holds him back. Hunters arrive and shock the werewolf, revealing he is the homeless man from earlier. He says he hasn't hurt anyone and came looking for the alpha. Gerard says he is an Omega, either kicked out of a pack or alone by choice. Then Gerard kills him with a sword. Derek forces Scott to watch. He says they need to form a pack. Chris reminds Gerard of their code, but Gerard says the code is broken because of Kate. Jackson is at home, and black liquid still leaks from him. Isaac meets Derek in an old train warehouse. Isaac gets into a fight with his dad about his grades. Things get bad fast. Dishes start flying and a glass pitcher smashes into the wall above Isaac's head. A piece of glass cuts his face, but then it starts healing right in front of his dad. His dad just stares, shocked. Isaac grabs his stuff and runs out into the pouring rain. His bike is in the yard. His dad follows him outside, but something is waiting in the dark. A creature jumps out and kills Mr. Leahy. Meanwhile, in the forest, Scott secretly meets up with Allison. Her parents aren't really on a date like she thought. Chris and Victoria are off somewhere else. They've kidnapped the school principal and are torturing him for information. The next day at school, Scott smells something weird in the locker room. It's the scent of another werewolf. Out on the lacrosse field, he keeps moving past his teammates, trying to figure out who it is. Just before Sheriff Stilinski shows up, Scott realizes it's Isaac. The sheriff brings bad news. Isaac's dad is dead. Later, Scott and Stiles make a plan. They get in trouble on purpose so they'll be sent to the principal's office. They want to eavesdrop on Jackson's talk with the sheriff. Jackson tells the truth. Isaac's dad used to beat him. After the sheriff leaves, the boys get a surprise. Allison's grandpa, Gerard, is now the school principal. Isaac ends up in jail. Derek goes to Scott and asks for help. Before heading to the station, they stop at Isaac's house to look around. They find a big freezer chest, big enough for a person. It's clear that Isaac used to get locked inside. Somewhere else, Allison overhears her dad and grandpa talking about killing Isaac. One of the hunters leaves the house dressed as a cop. He's carrying a box labeled with wolfsbane. Allison follows him and shoots arrows into his tires and his leg to slow him down. Back at the jail, Derek and Stiles rush to help Isaac, but the hunter is already there. The cell stands empty. Isaac fights the hunter and wins. Then his eyes turn to Stiles. He loses control for a moment. Derek steps in and growls with power. Isaac stops. Later that night, Allison finds Scott in the basement of Isaac's house. She brings metal chains to hold him during the full moon. She locks him in the freezer. Something sneaks up behind her. A tall, lizard-like creature attacks. Scott Scott hears the danger. His strength grows. He breaks out of the freezer. The creature runs off before he can catch it. At home, Jackson checks the camera he set up. He wanted to see himself change into a werewolf. Instead, the video shows something else. All night long, he stays asleep, looking completely human. At a gas station, Allison pulls in to refuel. The place is empty except for a man on a motorcycle. He nods and rides away. The lights go out. Allison panics and gets in her car, but her keys are gone. Stepping out, she's grabbed, a bag thrown over her head. Later, Allison wakes up tied to a chair at the Hale house, her father also bound nearby. A deep voice starts asking strange questions about hunters being bitten. Chris breaks free and reveals the voice came from a phone held by a hunter named Bennett, the same man from the gas station. Chris tells Allison he's going to train her. He hints that he knows she shot the hunter sent to kill Isaac. He explains that the women in their family are the true leaders, then gives her an arrow and orders Bennett to time her escape. Using the arrow, Allison cuts her ropes. It takes 2.5 hours, which impresses Bennett, who says it took him longer. Outside, Allison drives away. A scaly tail wraps around Bennett's foot. Something slashes the back of his neck. He draws a gun, but falls. Nearby, the lizard creature's dripping claws are shown. At school gym, it's climbing day. Scott and Allison scale the wall together. She brings up the creature that attacked her had a tail. After teasing each other, Allison knocks him off the wall. The class laughs. Next, Stiles climbs with a girl named Erica. She starts shaking, and Allison warns the coach that Erica is epileptic. Erica safely drops to the mat. In the locker room, Jackson overhears Scott and Stiles talking. They say Isaac is Derek's problem. They're also planning something. Scott suddenly feels off and runs to the gym, just in time to catch Erica falling from the climbing wall. Allison asks how he knew, and Scott says he just felt it. At the hospital, Scott's mom tells Erica she knows she's not taking her meds. After she leaves, Derek appears. He reads the side effects: weight gain, acne, and more. He promises he can make it all disappear. His eyes glow red. In biology class, a vaccine film plays. Matt is upset Jackson still has his camera. Jackson gets distracted by the lesson and then goes after Lydia. He accuses her of ruining his body so he can't become a werewolf. In the bathroom, Lydia cries. A pair of dirty feet appear under her stall. She realizes it's a man and follows him. The man looks at the trophy case. She sees Peter Hale's name and remembers him walking toward her. During lunch, Stiles makes a deal with Boyd for a set of keys. It costs him $50. Scott and Stiles talk plans. Erica walks in, confident, glowing, and changed. Outside, Scott sees her get into a car with Derek. Later, Scott breaks down at the clinic. He drops a jar and calls it a metaphor for his life. His boss gives him a pay raise and avoids answering werewolf questions. At home, Allison talks to her dad about Lydia. Chris wants her to watch Lydia closely. Allison says that sounds like spying. That evening, Scott, Allison, Stiles, and Lydia visit the ice rink. Stiles tries to charm Lydia. Allison teaches Scott to skate. He struggles and crashes. Lydia finds flower petals on the ice and follows them to a stalk of wolfsbane. Under the ice, she sees Peter Hale and screams. The others rush in to find her screaming, but nothing is there. Scott talks to Erica, trying to find Derek's next target. Erica shares a painful story about a seizure in class that was recorded and laughed at. She says she never wants to be that weak again. Allison sees her flirting with Scott. Scott grabs Erica's wrists in frustration. At the Argent house, Allison's mom finds a note from Scott in her daughter's book. She calmly slices her arm and visits Mrs. McCall at the hospital to get it stitched, without painkillers. They talk about their kids, and Mrs. McCall says Scott doesn't seem heartbroken. At school, Allison and Scott sit back to back in the lunchroom. They talk quietly about Erica and the growing tension between their families. Stiles shows up and says Boyd's table is empty. Scott says they have to find him. Stiles isn't sure that's necessary. Scott warns that wolfsbane bullets don't care how pretty Erica looks. At Derek's place, Jackson shows up demanding answers. When no one answers, he kicks in the door. Hunters are waiting. Chris tells Jackson to stop chasing the supernatural or they'll stop him themselves. At Boyd's house, Erica flirts with Stiles, then knocks him out. At the animal clinic, the alarm goes off. A body lies on the table. Chris is in the shadows. He wants to know what killed the hunter and confronts the vet, saying he knows he's more than just a doctor. Scott finds Boyd at the rink. Boyd says he joined Derek because he didn't want to be alone anymore. Scott says he deserves better. Derek and the others show up. Erica and Isaac say their lives have improved. Derek tells Scott to leave. Scott fights instead. He beats them down and yells that Derek is just using them. Derek says it's about power, then overpowers Scott and walks away. Boyd tells Scott he already got bitten but doesn't want to be like Derek. He wants to be like Scott. Stiles wakes up in a dumpster. Scott asks his boss why his injury isn't healing. The vet says it's because it came from an alpha. They need to talk. Later that night, Jackson trains alone on the lacrosse field. His car gets stuck in the mud. Rage takes over, and he lifts the truck with his bare hands. The strength makes him smile like never before. At the animal clinic, Dr. Bitten works fast to treat Scott. He says the creature that killed the hunter isn't a werewolf and suggests the Argents may keep a book with information on other monsters. Soon, Chris Argent and his father Gerard arrive. Gerard mentions retirement. Bitten reminds them of the hunter's code. He explains the wounds, paralysis from a scratch and death from deeper cuts. The creature used a toxin, and nothing was eaten, meaning it kills for no reason. At a garage, Stiles argues with a mechanic about the cost of repairs. Inside, he notices something sticky on the door and a photo of the mechanic in lacrosse gear. His fingers go numb. Outside, he sees a lizard creature crawling down his Jeep. It paralyzes the mechanic and crushes him under the lift. All Stiles can do is call 911. Later, Allison waits in her car. The fogged window shows a time, 9 p.m. Gerard arrives and talks to her about loyalty. He drops a leather book, takes pills, and warns her she may have to choose between friends and family. Her response at first upsets him, but she quickly changes her tone. Back at the garage, Stiles lies to his dad about what happened. He says he found the body under the Jeep. The sheriff doesn't buy it, but lets it go for now. Stiles asks if they can clean the Jeep before holding it as evidence. Allison finds Scott's note on a rock. He couldn't wait. Later that night, Scott picks up Stiles. Stiles tells him the creature felt like a person in costume, not a real monster. At Derek's place, Isaac attacks him but gets thrown aside. Erica and Boyd also try but fail. Derek warns them they need to learn fast or die. Erica kisses him. He tells her to stop. At Lydia's house, her mom finds blood on her hands and a broken mirror. Lydia says she doesn't remember anything. At school, Lydia hides her cuts with gloves. A student tries to talk to her, calling her self-centered. She ignores him. Meanwhile, Stiles tells Scott he's tired of being the middleman. He shares a message from Allison and says he's done being the messenger. Scott thanks him and says he's the only one they trust. Scott talks about Deaton's book idea. Stiles says it's called a bestiary. Scott misunderstands the word. Lydia meets the school counselor. She talks about trusting her friends, then says something strange and can't explain why she said it. In the hallway, Jackson gives Danny a memory card. He wants Danny to clean up the video. Danny says he isn't interested in Jackson, who brushes it off with a joke. Stiles continues helping Scott and Allison search for Gerard's book. Allison says it's probably in Gerard's office, but her parents watch her messages. Stiles keeps running back and forth. At the lacrosse game, Danny shows Matt the footage. Parts are missing, exactly during the full moon. On the field, a strong player named Eddie dominates. Jackson tells Scott to use his powers. Scott refuses because Gerard is watching. Allison distracts Gerard and gets his coat. Stiles finds the keys in the pocket. Matt takes photos around the game, snapping one of Allison. Melissa jokes about Scott playing something safer than lacrosse. On his way to Gerard's office, Stiles sees Lydia crying in her car. He comforts her, then runs off. In the crowd, Boyd watches. Erica warns him that Derek won't like it. Boyd joins the game anyway. Inside the office, Stiles finds nothing. Erica catches him and brings him to the pool where Derek is waiting. Derek demands answers. Stiles lies again. Back on the field, Boyd's eyes glow. Scott tells him to stop, but Boyd keeps going. Scott scores but breaks his leg. His fast healing doesn't go unnoticed by Gerard. At the pool, Stiles finally tells Derek what he saw. Behind them, the lizard creature appears. It knocks out Erica and slashes Derek. Stiles helps Derek into the pool. The creature circles, but doesn't touch the water. At dinner, Scott joins the Argents. Gerard asks tense questions. In the kitchen, Chris warns Scott to be careful around Gerard. In the pool, the creature pulls back from the water, clearly hurt by it. Stiles and Derek stay in for safety. Back at Gerard's room, Scott and Allison search for the book. Using his hearing, Scott opens a safe. Inside is only a cookbook. 2 hours pass. Stiles holds Derek in the water but has to let go. He rushes for his phone and calls Scott. Scott hangs up too quickly, not knowing they're in danger. Allison remembers a flash drive on Gerard's keys. Scott grabs it and runs toward the school. He hears the creature's roar. At the pool, Stiles pulls Derek from the water. His grip slips. Then Scott appears, transformed. He fights the lizard. The creature wins at first, but sees its reflection in the glass, freezes, and runs. In the parking lot, Scott and Stiles open the flash drive but can't read it. Derek shows up and calls the creature a kanama. It's a shapeshifter that doesn't know what it is. Stiles calls it a monster. Scott wants to work with the Argents to stop it. Derek refuses. He says he'll kill it. Later, Scott picks up his mom. Gerard is waiting. He stabs Scott and twists the blade. The kind mask drops. He threatens Scott's mom unless Scott agrees to follow orders. Jackson struggles to lift a heavy bench press. Danny walks away to the showers. For a short moment, Jackson starts hearing everything around him with sharp and strange clarity. Erica appears and takes him to Derek. Inside the warehouse, Derek wants answers. He asks what happened to Jackson during the full moon. Jackson says nothing happened. To test him, Derek uses Kanima venom. Jackson freezes, unable to move. This proves he isn't the creature they're looking for. Later, Isaac speaks to Jackson and pressures him into changing his police statement. With no witness, Isaac is no longer a suspect and returns to school. At school, Stiles brings new research on the Kanima. The creature may come from South America and might go after killers, but this doesn't match what they've seen. Jackson's hearing sharpens again. He listens in on Erica and Isaac. They plan to test someone in chemistry class. Their focus is on Lydia. In class, Lydia sees something no one else sees. Peter Hale writes on the board. Then, her hand moves on its own. She keeps writing the same words over and over again. Students laugh. No one understands what is happening to her. During chemistry, Scott, Stiles, and Allison watch Lydia closely. The teacher mixes up lab partners. Erica ends up with Scott and uses the moment to threaten Allison. Isaac becomes Lydia's partner. He gives her crystal candy filled with venom. She eats it, and nothing changes. The others now believe Lydia is the Kanima. Outside, Derek waits for Lydia in the parking lot. The group meets to plan. They hope to talk him down, but stay ready to fight. Later, Lydia visits the school counselor. During a test, she sees disturbing images, but she hides her true reaction. Meanwhile, Matt and Danny talk to Jackson about his missing camera footage. Jackson starts thinking. He remembers that Lydia has a key to his house and begins to suspect her. Allison asks the counselor for help with a page from the bestiary. The words reveal something strange. The Kanima, like a wolf, becomes strongest during the full moon. But unlike wolves, it doesn't want a pack. It wants a friend. Scott finds Boyd and tries to prove himself. Even though Boyd is bigger, Scott brings him down. Derek arrives. He says Lydia is the Kanima because she was bitten. He believes that the bite brings out someone's true nature. Scott disagrees. He thinks Lydia is immune and that Jackson got her immunity. At the library, Jackson finally sees his full moon footage. The video shows him sitting up with glowing eyes. That night, Allison, Stiles, and Jackson bring Lydia to Scott's house. They lock the doors. Scott gets delayed by the coach. Then Allison calls him. Derek and his pack are already outside. Inside Scott's room, Jackson accuses Lydia of messing with his video. Lydia gives him back the key and begins to cry. They kiss. Jackson's skin starts to change. Scales begin to form. Isaac comes in through the back. He fights Stiles and Allison. Lydia hears the noise and opens the door. Jackson falls to the floor and transforms into the Kanima. Before she can help, he disappears. Lydia runs to the bathroom and locks herself in. She calls the police. Allison hurries into Scott's room. She notices venom on the windowsill. Erica crashes through the window to attack. Allison shoots her with a venom arrow. Erica hits the floor, frozen. Outside, Derek and Boyd see both Isaac and Erica thrown from the house. Scott, Stiles, and Allison step onto the porch together. Derek sees that they have become a pack of their own. From the rooftop, the Kanima watches them. Then it vanishes into the trees. Lydia walks outside, shaken. Scott now understands. Jackson is the Kanima. Later that night, far from town, the Kanima finds a parked car on a quiet road. A hand from inside reaches for the window. The Kanima touches it. Then it turns and disappears into the forest. The car drives away. Danny finishes working on Jackson's full moon video. The screen shows Jackson sitting up, his eyes glowing. His body begins to shake and change. Then the video skips to part of the transformation. Danny sends a message saying it's ready, but no one sees it. He tosses his tablet into his car and walks off. Allison drops Lydia off at her house. She tells her to stay quiet about what happened. Lydia keeps asking questions. Allison avoids giving answers. Lydia doesn't understand why Allison still cares about Scott. In an empty industrial area, Derek fights the Kanima. He keeps dodging its claws. Chris Argent shows up and shoots it. The creature falls but gets up fast. It throws Chris into a wall. The Kanima crawls to Gerard and stops. It stares at him. Before it can move again, Scott tackles it. Later, Scott and Stiles track the creature to a nightclub called Jungle. Inside, they realize it's a gay club. Scott picks up Danny's scent. They believe Danny is the next target. Up above the dance floor, the Kanima hides in the shadows. Danny stands at the bar watching his ex with someone else. The bartender gives him advice. Stiles and Scott push through the crowd to reach Danny. Above them, Jackson hangs upside down. The Kanima strikes from above. Dancers fall one by one, frozen. Danny is among them. Derek shows up and slashes the Kanima. It runs off, leaving behind a trail of blood. The trail ends at Danny's car. Inside, they find Jackson, back in human form. At Lydia's house, a man shows up. He holds her dog and acts strange. He flirts and gives her a flower with wolfsbane, asking her to keep it. Outside the nightclub, Danny is carried out on a stretcher. Scott asks him questions, but Danny only wants to know if his ex was also paralyzed. When he hears the answer, he smiles. Scott and Stiles try to sneak Jackson away, but the sheriff catches them. To cover up, Stiles says he was there for Danny after a breakup. The sheriff doesn't believe him but lets them go with a warning. Later, Jackson wakes up inside a sheriff's van deep in the woods. He is chained and shouting. Scott and Stiles hear him. Stiles tries to text Jackson's parents but messes up by ending the message with, "I love you." This gets the sheriff's attention and a search begins. At school, Gerard questions Allison. He doesn't buy her excuse and tests her heartbeat for lies. She stays calm and notices new security cameras watching the halls. In English class, her mother surprises her by stepping in as the new substitute teacher. In the woods, Jackson says he remembers nothing about the attack. He insists he went home after the game. Meanwhile, Allison's mother warns her that if she can't stay strong, they might have to kill Scott. Stiles hears police chatter through a scanner. He throws away Jackson's phone and drives the van to a new spot. Scott visits Danny at the hospital. Danny admits he helped Jackson with the video but doesn't say much more. Scott promises to get his fake ID back from the police. Later, Scott, Allison, and Stiles meet again in the woods. They talk about what the Kanema did. It could have killed them but didn't. It passed over Allison, let Stiles go, and may have only trapped Derek. Scott thinks the creature is confused. Stiles wants to stop Jackson for good, but Scott believes Jackson can still be saved. From inside the van, Jackson hears them and starts to cry. His body begins to change again. Scales cover his skin. At the same time, Allison tells Scott she loves him. They kiss in her car. Stiles bursts in. Jackson is gone. Stiles and Allison agree to tell their families everything. Scott decides he's ready to reveal his true form to the sheriff, but when they get to the station, Jackson is already there. He stands beside his father. Lydia shows up at Allison's house. She says she can translate the bestiary. The meaning of the word friend was wrong. The Kanema isn't looking for a friend. It is looking for a master. In the woods, a man and woman argue inside a small trailer. The lights cut out. Outside, the man speaks to a hooded figure before getting yanked into the air by a tail. His body crashes through the window. The creature, the Kanema, enters but backs away after noticing the woman is pregnant. At the sheriff's office, Scott and Stiles talk to Allison on speakerphone. They suspect Jackson doesn't remember being the Kanema, entering a trance during his shifts. Flashbacks show Jackson covered in blood, confused and unaware. The sheriff reads a restraining order. Scott and Stiles must stay away from Jackson. Both parents are present. Scott's mom is furious, grounding him from everything but school and work. Scott almost confesses the truth, but when she brings up his absent father, he goes along with that instead. In Derek's hideout, Isaac questions why they need Scott. Derek admits the Kanema is harder to kill than expected and believes Gerard is planning something. Erica is sent to find out what Scott and Stiles know. At school, Allison slips a tablet with bestiary info to Scott and Stiles through a bookshelf. The text explains the Kanema serves a master, acting on vengeance. The mutation keeps it from transforming until it resolves a part of its past. They think Jackson's unknown birth parents might be connected. In biology class, Jackson swallows a snake. At home, Scott's mom finds only one protection left in a box, confirming her suspicions. Allison follows Jackson into the locker room but runs into Matt, who invites her to a rave. Inside, Jackson mocks Allison and insults Scott. Allison tries to fight back, but Jackson pins her. Then, he snaps out of it, confused. Scott arrives and a fight breaks out. They wreck the room. Erica and Stiles hear water leaking and rush in. Scott gets tossed into the hallway. The fight continues until Erica pulls Jackson off. Matt finds Allison's tablet and emails the bestiary text to himself. Mr. Harris gives them all detention. Mrs. Argent learns from Scott's mom that he and Allison are still seeing each other. Their conversation is cold and sharp. Lydia's stalker asks her to meet him after school. He tells her to bring the flower he gave her. In detention, Matt reads the word Kanema aloud. Jackson gets a headache and asks to leave. Mr. Harris follows. Jackson goes to the locker room where the snake bursts from his eye into the sink. Stiles, Scott, and Erica look into Jackson's past. Erica says he'll inherit money when he turns 18 from the crash that took his birth parents. The report shows both died instantly. They suspect the accident wasn't an accident. Mrs. Argent confronts Scott in the office, threatening and probing. She demands to know if he's testing the springs with Allison, staring him down with a pencil sharpened to nothing. Lydia can't find the flower and wanders into the woods. She finds what looks like a beautiful house, but is really the burned remains of the Hale house. Inside, she kisses her stalker, but in the mirror, sees Peter Hale. In the library, Jackson sees book covers change into strange messages. Scott finds Matt unconscious and the Kanema attacking. Jackson moves like a puppet, writing a threat on the chalkboard before jumping out the window. Erica suffers a seizure from the venom. She insists they take her to Derek, not a hospital. At Derek's, he breaks Erica's arm to draw out the venom. She recovers and tells Stiles he makes a good Batman. Scott tells Derek he'll join the pack, just long enough to catch Jackson. At the hospital, the pregnant woman from the trailer gives birth. Later, the hooded figure suffocates her. At Hale House, Lydia realizes she's been hallucinating the stalker and Peter. Peter admits she was his backup plan because she is immune. He disappears, and she finds wolfsbane in her hand. Beneath the floor, Peter Hale's dead body lies buried. Jackson gets a text and suddenly leaves school. He drives to a warehouse where a crowd is lining up for a secret concert. Matt is in line too and lets Jackson cut in, still afraid after being attacked before. Jackson seems distant, like he isn't in control. Scott watches from a distance and tries to ask Matt for ticket money, but Matt refuses. When Jackson buys his ticket, the woman behind the counter gets nervous and ends sales early, riding up in the elevator. At the sheriff's department, Stiles and his dad eat together. Stiles reads the board behind him. They realize the victims, Sean, Jessica, and the mechanic, are all 24. The pattern almost doesn't fit until they remember Isaac's older brother Camden, who died in combat. They connect the deaths to students in Adrian Harris's chemistry class from 2006. In the morgue, Chris Argent shows Allison the bodies of the latest victims. He explains that one was taken care of by the Kanema, the other by a person. He pushes Allison for more details and says their family has a duty to protect people. When she hesitates, he blames her for knowing about the Kanema and not stopping it. She finally tells him about Jackson. Scott, Derek, and Isaac meet at the vet clinic. They argue about trusting each other. Dr. Bitten says the Kanema has no clear weakness, but reveals it cannot swim. That could mean its master fears water. They realize they're hunting two people, the creature and its controller. They think the pregnant woman's survival might be due to the unborn child being innocent, or that Jackson's trauma is tied to his own mother's death. Deaton suggests that anything done to the Kanema could affect its master. At school, Matt questions why the fight in the library hasn't caused more trouble. He has 2 tickets to the concert, but says sales have stopped. Isaac later gets tickets by beating up another student. Scott and Allison meet in the chemistry lab and plan to use her getting close to Matt as a way to trick her family. She agrees to kiss Matt if it helps. Outside, her mother watches them with hatred. Dr. Deaton gives Scott a syringe of ketamine and explains how to use mountain ash dust to trap the Kanema. Stiles has to believe it will work for the barrier to hold. At the Argent home, Chris hands out weapons. Allison tells them Jackson will be at the concert. Chris wants to lure him away from others, but Gerard wants him eliminated. Stiles notices his dad's badge and gun are gone. The sheriff has been suspended due to the van theft and Jackson's restraining order. At the concert, Scott sees Allison dancing with Matt. She says she told her family everything and they have their own plan. Scott warns her to stay out of the way. He gives the syringe to Isaac, telling him to be careful, not for Jackson's sake, but for his own. Derek and Boyd fight hunters outside. Boyd gets hit with wolfsbane-laced bullets. Inside, Isaac and Erica try to trap Jackson. He scratches them both, but is slowed. Isaac manages to inject him. Stiles finishes the mountain ash ring but runs out of dust. A bumper sticker reminds him to believe in the outcome. He visualizes the circle closing, and it works. Scott gets hit by a car. Mrs. Argent drags him into a back room filled with wolfsbane vapor. He starts to pass out. She says it will look like an asthma attack. Matt and Allison run into Mr. Harris. He awkwardly explains that his date is legal. Matt kisses Allison, but she walks away. Jackson, seemingly unconscious, grabs Isaac's hand. Stiles tries to talk to the master through him. The voice responds coldly, saying the victims are guilty of eliminating the master. Gerard tests the mountain ash barrier and pulls his hand back, confused. Jackson transforms and escapes. He slashes Kara Simmons, the ticket girl. Erica and Isaac can't follow him, blocked by the barrier. Stiles celebrates that it worked. Scott howls for help. Derek hears it and forces Stiles to break the line. Inside, Derek saves Scott but gets attacked by Mrs. Argent. She escapes. The sheriff arrives and learns the new victim doesn't fit the class list, throwing off the theory. Deaton treats Scott at the clinic. Ms. Morell questions his trust in the kids. Deaton believes they're ready, even without knowing what's ahead. In the parking lot, Victoria Argent stumbles into Chris's arms. He sees 2 bites on her chest. She collapses as he holds her close. Lydia dreams of being in the shower. Someone calls her name. She pulls back the curtain and steps onto the lacrosse field in her formality dress. The crowd cheers, holding signs for her, but one girl looks scared. Peter Hale walks onto the field and attacks her. She wakes in bed, covered in dirt. A hallucination of Peter lies next to her. He explains he isn't fully real yet, and shares that his plan will come together on the worm moon, Lydia's birthday. He shows her 3 versions of her party: happy, bloody, and disturbingly silent. He says her immunity matters and warns her about what's coming. At the Argent home, Chris cleans Victoria's bites. He tries to convince Gerard that they might not be fatal, but Gerard says she's already dead. He calls her a shell, soon to change, and tells Chris not to hesitate. Scott and Derek talk. They admit they can't save Jackson, but eliminating him hasn't worked either. Derek says each full moon makes the Kanema stronger. He feels responsible for turning Jackson. Allison drops Matt off. He tries to kiss her, but she brushes it off. After he leaves his bag behind, she finds photos of herself on his camera. Some are clearly taken from outside her house. Matt catches her looking, but she denies seeing anything. He invites her in to see more, but she leaves. In the lair, Derek prepares to chain up his pack. Boyd explains the Triskelion symbol on Derek's trunk. Derek says it represents the rise and fall between Alpha, Beta, and Omega. He now considers Scott part of the pack. He warns them about bloodlust under the full moon and says it's the price of healing. Lydia visits Allison with bags of party clothes. She says invites aren't needed because her party is the biggest of the year. Allison gently reminds her that things have changed. When Lydia mentions Jackson, Allison seems worried. Victoria Argent, pale and sweating, tries to speak with Allison, but her daughter brushes her off. Victoria walks away without protest, smiling faintly. Stiles reviews the 2006 yearbook. He and his father realize the swim team connects the victims. Even Isaac's dad was the coach. The puzzle begins to fit. At school, Lydia invites Jackson to her party. He acts distant and warns her not to want him there. His eyes flash briefly into Kanema form. At the party, Stiles arrives with a huge gift. Lydia is busy handing out punch. Allison, Scott, and Stiles talk about how empty the party looks. Allison insists they owe Lydia support. Scott invites the lacrosse team. Stiles invites the drag queens from Jungle. Derek chains up Boyd, Erica, and Isaac. Erica's restraints include a head clamp. Isaac stays calm. He asks Derek how he handles the full moon. Derek says his anchor is anger. A loose chain worries him. His pack might not stay restrained. At the Argents, Chris brings Victoria pills. She insists on a knife. She writes a letter, says goodbye to her daughter through a photo, and asks for Chris's help one last time. As her eyes glow with the rising moon, they drive the knife into her heart. At the party, everyone is loose and giddy. Lydia gives Jackson a glass of punch, wolfsbane petals floating inside. Matt almost drinks his, but throws it away after Allison dismisses him. Lydia gives Scott a glass too. He drinks it, then realizes Allison is gone. Inside, Matt tries to justify his creepy photos to Allison. She calls it stalking. He grabs her. She knocks him down. Allison hallucinates being shot by herself. Stiles hallucinates his father blaming him for his mother's death. Scott sees Allison and Jackson kissing. Jackson sees faceless figures calling themselves his real parents. Lydia slips away from the party. Stiles gets dunked in the pool to sober up. Boyd and Erica break free and attack Derek. Isaac escapes but returns to help. He says thinking about his father helped him stay in control. Derek realizes the abuse didn't start until later. Victoria prepares to die. She wants to be remembered as strong. Chris assures her Allison will know the truth. Party guests reach peak intoxication. One nearly drowns before Jackson pulls him out. It's Matt. Moments later, Scott sees Matt standing with the Kanema before both vanish. Lydia arrives at the lair. She knocks out Derek with a powder and drags him to Hale House. She places his hand in Peter Hale's, aligning mirrors to reflect the moonlight into Peter's grave. Peter's hand grabs Derek's arm. Derek's alpha eyes fade. Peter bursts out of the earth, alive again, smirking, and ready for the party. Matt recalls the night Jackson first turned into the Kanema. Suspicious about what Jackson plans to do with his camera, Matt uses a streaming app to spy on him. He watches Jackson transform, then sees the creature appear behind his car. When their hands meet through the glass, Matt shares the Kanema's memory of getting the better of Isaac's father. At the station, Stiles and Scott try convincing the sheriff that Matt is the real suspect, not Mr. Harris. They show footage of Matt near one of the crime scenes. Melissa remembers Matt from that night, muddy shoes and acting strange. The sheriff connects Matt to several deaths using credit card receipts, security footage, and footprints. Stiles goes to the front desk and finds a deputy dead. Matt appears, gun in hand, and takes control. Derek wakes up in the Hale house. Dr. Bitten stands over him with a dog whistle. Derek is weak. Bitten warns that Peter's resurrection left him vulnerable. He believes Peter will use his mind to manipulate, not just power. He urges Derek to find Scott before Gerard's plan goes further. Back at the station, Matt forces Stiles and Scott to destroy all the evidence. The sheriff is handcuffed. Dead deputies lie nearby. Matt boasts that Jackson handles the work for him, that thinking about crime is enough to make it happen. At home, Allison sits with her mother's robe. Gerard enters with a letter, claiming Victoria asked him to explain her suicide. He uses the moment to push Allison toward revenge. Derek arrives at the station but collapses, paralyzed by the Kanema. Jackson, half transformed, stands behind him. Allison, following instructions from her mother's note, burns it and clears her room of all personal belongings, keeping only weapons. Matt mocks Stiles, then has Jackson paralyze him. He collapses onto Derek. When Melissa arrives, Matt shoots Scott and threatens his mother. He locks her in a cell. Matt reveals he's after the bestiary. He pulls up his shirt to show that he's starting to change, becoming something like Jackson. Allison receives a suspicious text from Scott asking for the bestiary. She knows it's not him and alerts her family. Gerard puts Allison in charge of the mission. Chris questions this, but Allison embraces the role, saying Derek must die and so will anyone in the way. On the floor, Stiles and Derek discuss how Matt broke the rules. The bestiary won't help him because the universe balances actions. Derek injures himself to force healing and fight off the paralysis. Matt explains his past. Years ago, he almost drowned at a party thrown by Coach Leahy. The swim team watched and did nothing. Leahy saved him, but forced his silence. The trauma caused nightmares and breathing problems. When Matt saw Leahy at Kate Argent's funeral, he wished him dead, and that night, the Kanema took his life. Matt soon realizes Jackson is responding to his thoughts. He snaps photos of his targets and lets the Kanema do the rest. The power goes out. Hunters surround the building and fire inside. Smoke grenades follow. Scott escapes with Stiles, the Kanema close behind. Jackson goes full creature, but can't get through a locked door. Scott finds Allison in the hallway. She threatens him with her crossbow, demanding Derek. Scott doesn't understand what's happened to her. Allison storms off. In the evidence room, Chris and Allison track Jackson. He attacks, but Allison shoots him in the head. He shrugs it off. She runs, hides, and ambushes him with a knife. It's no use. He grabs her throat. She stabs again, but he paralyzes her. Matt appears to declare his obsession. He's interrupted by noise and walks away. Chris rescues Allison. The sheriff frees himself. Stiles crawls down a hallway. Matt finds them and knocks out the sheriff. Smoke pours out of the building. Gerard coughs and reaches for his pills. Then, in the shadows, he spots Peter Hale. Inside, Melissa begs to help Scott. The Kanema threatens her. Derek jumps in, fighting the creature. Scott saves his mom, and she sees his werewolf face. She's shocked. Scott meets Gerard, who reminds him of their deal. Gerard tells Scott to leave Matt to him. Derek watches from the shadows, learning about Scott's alliance. Matt escapes, runs to a nearby bridge. Gerard gets there first and drowns him. The Kanema appears. It places a hand on Gerard's, accepting him as its new master. From above, Peter Hale watches. Stiles strings his lacrosse stick, telling Ms. Morell about drowning, how the body fights to survive. He describes it as peaceful, but makes clear he doesn't believe Matt deserved peace. He brings up the creepy photos found on Matt's computer, many altered to make it look like he and Allison were a couple. Stiles says Matt was disturbed long before the annihilation. He also reveals that his father is back as sheriff, though things between them feel different. He hasn't spoken to Scott, who's also struggling at home. Scott tries to talk to his mom, but she shuts him out. Allison hasn't spoken to him either, grieving her mother's death and growing closer to her father. A message fogged onto Allison's car window from Scott asks to meet, but she wipes it away. Later, she and Chris study a map, identifying a key location, the Beacon Hills Rail Depot. Stiles talks about Jackson, who sits alone at home with bloodied hands and claws. Strangely, Stiles says Lydia is now the most normal among them. When Ms. Morell asks if he's nervous about the championship game, he says he never plays, but with Matt dead and Isaac missing, that might change. She mentions the other missing werewolves, and Stiles admits he's not sleeping and constantly feels something bad is coming. She calls it hypervigilance, often tied to trauma. She encourages him not to give up, even when it feels hopeless. Scott hears a noise after his shower. In his room, the Kanema holds his mother by the throat. Gerard sits calmly nearby. He says Scott hasn't been answering his calls. He wants Derek and his pack and threatens Melissa. When Scott refuses, Gerard leaves. Melissa is terrified and begs her son to give Gerard what he wants. Boyd and Erica walk through the woods at night and hear wolves howling. They think they've found another pack. The next day, Derek tries convincing them to stay. He explains how 2 wolves can sound like a dozen due to the Beau Geste effect, but they leave anyway. Moments later, Peter Hale appears and offers help, criticizing Derek's failed leadership. Derek punches him across the room. At the vet clinic, Isaac shows up. Scott and Bitten explain how werewolf senses include empathy. Isaac absorbs a dog's pain through touch and breaks down. Scott tells him he cried the first time too. Isaac warns Scott about Boyd and Erica leaving. He also says Jackson will be playing in the lacrosse game that night. At school, Danny talks to Jackson in the locker room. Jackson zones out, then warns Danny to stay away from him during the game. Scott overhears. Melissa arrives as Coach Finstock gives his usual Independence Day speech. Stiles explains, this is tradition. Gerard enters, making Melissa uncomfortable. He tells Scott that someone will die by the end of the game unless Scott gives up Derek. Allison, Chris, and another hunter use speakers to mimic howls in the woods. Boyd and Erica are nearby, hiding. This is the sound they heard the night before. Back with Peter and Derek, Peter again offers help. He says they need each other. At the game, Stiles finally gets to play. Coach calls him in because someone worse isn't available. His dad cheers wildly. Gerard continues threatening Scott using a voice only he can hear. Isaac arrives, surprising Gerard. He and Scott plan to force Coach to play Scott by knocking out teammates. It works, until Jackson scratches Isaac and paralyzes him. In the woods, Allison shoots Erica in the leg. Boyd tries to help her, but gets hit with multiple arrows. Allison smiles during the attack. Chris arrives just in time to stop her from finishing the job. With Isaac down, Coach has no choice but to let Scott play. Melissa senses something is wrong. She tells Scott to help however he can. Scott and Stiles get hit hard during the game. Scott realizes Gerard has left the field, but can still hear him. Gerard offers Allison in exchange for Derek's location. Allison tells her father she wants a new bow. He asks what she was thinking. She's cold and dismissive. She calls Gerard to report capturing Boyd and Erica. In the locker room, Isaac crawls from Gerard and two hunters. Gerard plans to kill him, but stops when he sees Scott's glowing eyes in the mirror. Stiles scores his first goal, then a second. The crowd erupts. Lydia cheers for him and Stiles beams. Scott rejoins the field. Time ticks down. Jackson stands alone, claws out. Then the lights go out. People scream. Panic breaks out. Melissa finds Scott and says someone's hurt. The lights come back. Jackson lies on the field. Lydia runs to him. Melissa checks for a heartbeat. There is none. He has deep wounds in his chest. She and Lydia begin CPR. Isaac and Scott see the bloody hands and realize Jackson did it to himself. The sheriff rushes onto the field, but Stiles is nowhere in sight. He starts shouting for his son. Jackson is lying zipped inside a black body bag in the back of an ambulance. A strange, clear liquid seeps through the seams. Melissa insists on going with him, brushing off what the EMT says. In the Argent's basement, a hunter drags Stiles into the shadows. When the lights turn on, he sees Boyd and Erica tied up and hanging from the ceiling. Their mouths are covered, and wires hold them in place. He tries to help, but gets shocked by the cables. Meanwhile, Sheriff Stilinski struggles with the news about Jackson and the fact that Stiles has gone missing. He talks to Scott and Isaac, who pretend everything is fine. They say Stiles just needs time after the game. At school, Coach Finstock gets emotional. He says he wants Scott back next season. Once the room clears out, Scott tears open Stiles' locker to find a scent trail. Before he can track it, Derek and Peter walk in. Scott is stunned. Peter is alive. Back in the basement, Gerard tells Boyd and Erica that torture won't make them give up Derek. Stiles speaks up, but is knocked out cold. Elsewhere, Scott and Derek argue about Gerard. Peter tries to calm things down, even throwing in a joke about Melissa. Isaac tells them Jackson is dead. Peter disagrees. He explains that Gerard made Jackson kill himself to push a final transformation. Upstairs, Chris talks to Allison and Gerard. He warns Allison she's not thinking for herself anymore. She ignores him and stays loyal to Gerard. Chris breaks her crossbow string, hoping it will wake her up. At the morgue, Melissa notices more of the clear fluid. She unzips the bag and finds Jackson inside a see-through cocoon. Later, Stiles limps into his house. He looks beat up and tells his dad he got jumped after the game. His father yells but softens once Stiles jokes about it. They hug. At the Hale house, Peter shows a laptop hidden under the stairs. He scanned the Hale family lore into it. Just then, Scott gets a call. Jackson is moving inside the cocoon. Lydia shows up at Stiles' house. She's upset and wants to see Jackson. She says Jackson was asking for his house key. She has to return it. At the morgue, Jackson twitches. Melissa jumps back, startled. Isaac watches, saying it's a bad sign. Jackson snaps his jaws, scaring everyone. Meanwhile, Chris lowers the electric current on Boyd and Erica. He explains that electricity blocks werewolf powers. Then he talks about how hard it is to tell what's human and what's not anymore. Back at Stiles' house, Lydia finds a stack of birthday presents meant for her. She cries. Then a message comes through. Jackson is alive. Peter explains the cocoon means Jackson wasn't done changing. This is the final phase, one that includes wings. They decide to meet up with Scott. Gerard senses something. He tells Allison that it has begun. At the hospital parking lot, Scott and Isaac carry the body bag. Chris pulls up in his car. Everyone piles in. Peter wants to go back for Lydia, but Derek says no. Peter warns that this is all part of Gerard's trap. Scott thanks Chris for helping. He realizes they're both fighting the same enemy now. Lydia insists on helping Jackson. Stiles tries to stop her. She says she'll go alone if needed. He lets her go. Chris tells Scott that Gerard used Allison the same way he once used Kate. Scott agrees they have to fix everything. They drive off in Chris's SUV. Back on the field, the sheriff comforts Stiles. He tells him he was the hero of the game. Stiles doesn't feel like one. At a warehouse, Derek, Peter, Scott, Isaac, and Chris gather around Jackson's body, but the cocoon is gone. Jackson rises and stabs Derek with his claws. Chaos begins. Gerard steps out. His real goal is revealed. He wants to be bitten to cure his cancer. Scott agrees to help, but tricks him. Derek bites Gerard, but the bite fails. Gerard spits out black goo. Scott tells him the truth. He switched the pills with Mountain Ash. The plan worked. Gerard falls. Allison attacks, but Jackson grabs her. Stiles and Lydia crash in with the Jeep. Lydia steps forward with his house key. Something changes. Jackson remembers love. He transforms back. Derek and Peter strike. He dies in Lydia's arms. But then, Jackson heals. His eyes glow bright blue. He stands again, a werewolf now. Later, Allison ends her relationship with Scott. He says he understands. She says she doesn't believe in fate. He says werewolves aren't real either. In the woods, Boyd and Erica are attacked. A group of glowing-eyed figures surround them. Elsewhere, Bitten follows a trail of black goo. It leads to Gerard. Ms. Morel joins him. She hints that their work is not done yet. Outside the Hale house, Peter shows Derek a symbol on the door. It means an alpha pack is coming. Back at the lacrosse field, Stiles and Scott sit together. Stiles still hopes for Lydia. Scott tells him to just ask her. The two train together side by side. Stiles yells when Scott's eyes glow. No wolf powers allowed. That is it for today. More recaps are coming soon, so make sure to subscribe. If you like the breakdown, leave a comment below and let me know your favorite moment. Don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps a lot. See you in the next one.